Hi guys, it's Reilly with another all-English episode. I'm recording this on Wednesday, a few days after coming back from Nagoya. I had a great time at the event talking with everybody, and then afterward going to the izakaya and trying Nagoya food. I don't remember everything we had, but we had misokatsu on kind of a stick. I don't think that's the normal way to eat it, but it was pretty good. We had chicken wings, tebasaki, and what was it called? Tama-sen or sen-tama, something like that. Eggs and senbei rice crackers. And yeah, I liked all of it, and it was fun talking with everyone. And so we've got 5 more weekends, 5 more cities. I don't know if I can do them in order. Let's see, Fukuoka, Sendai, Tokyo, Sapporo, Osaka. I think that's the order for the next 5 weeks. And yeah, if you would like to come and you haven't gotten a ticket yet, you can find it on Sota's Instagram, eigonosota, or on my Instagram on the story highlights on my profile, Reilly Sullivan XD, or I think it's at the podcast_listening, this podcast's Instagram account as well. But yeah, anyway, let's get into the episode. I'm not going to talk about the Nagoya, I'm not going to talk about the events in much more detail, but I thought I should do a little bit of an ad before the episode. Anyway, let's go. Okay, so yeah, at work, so I teach elementary school aged kids in my day job, I guess you could say. And I have this kind of class of high level kids who are elementary school, but some of them have lived in other countries and some of them have just been taking a lot of English classes for basically their whole lives. So they're pretty high level for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And so we've been reading through The Hobbit, which was one of my favorite books as a kid. I guess it's still one of my favorite books, but, more of a kid's book. And so I've been reading a bit about and thinking a lot about the author of The Hobbit, whose name is J.R.R. Tolkien, and kind of realizing that, he's, I don't know, maybe the person that I most look up to, at least historical person that I most look up to, not including, my parents and whatever people in my real life. So yeah, J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm going to talk about him today. So yeah, he's most famous for being the author of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which were originally books. There were movies made. The Lord of the Rings movies were made in what, early 2000s, 2002, 2003, 4, 5, something like that. And then there were Hobbit movies made, maybe 10 years after that. I don't remember exactly. And then now there's the Rings of Power series on Netflix, which I haven't watched too much of. I watched about maybe 4 or 5 episodes before getting kind of mad and stopping. But yeah, anyway, so my dad read me The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings when I was a kid. Every night before bed, he would read I don't know, a few pages to me, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, until I fell asleep. And so for my whole life, as long as I can remember, I've been a huge fan of these books. That being said, as I mentioned with the Rings of Power, I was not a big fan of that show, kind of because it changed a lot of things that might be good if you're not, if you don't have a history with all of it, but for me it was too different. But anyway, I won't talk too much about that. I'm a big fan of The Lord of the Rings in general and Tolkien and a lot of the stuff he's done. And so I would like to talk about his life today. Maybe in a future episode I'll talk more about the stories of those books. But anyway, so Tolkien, he was an English author and professor at Oxford. He was born in 1892, actually in South Africa, but his father died when he was young, and the family moved back to England, where he was raised by kind of mixed family. His mom, for some of it, although she died when he was not too old either, maybe, before high school age, for sure, maybe around junior high school age. And then he was raised kind of by his grandparents and other family members, and then also by a kind of Catholic priest was his guardian at one point. And so, yeah, he grew up fairly religious, but very, and also very smart, I guess you could say, very curious, maybe. He was kind of grew up studying Latin and Anglo-Saxon, which is Old English, like the kind of English that was spoken like 1,500 to 1,000 years ago. And he would like make his own languages for fun, kind of like, a child's game, I guess, but maybe a really smart child. And then, yeah, eventually when he got older, he went to college, went to university at Oxford and studied English language and literature. And I think the language there includes, Old English and stuff like that, not just modern English. Yeah, while he was in, I don't know if this is while he was in university, but I'm not sure the timeline here, doesn't make sense, but when he was 16, must have been before university, I think, he met a girl, I guess a woman, who was 3 years older than him, and they started hanging out and whatever, and when his priest dad, stepdad, adopted dad, I don't know exactly what to call that guy, but the priest that was kind of looking after him, when the priest found out about the woman that Tolkien was seeing, he forbade Tolkien from dating her anymore. Forbade meaning he didn't let Tolkien see her. One of the reasons maybe was because she was older, and another was that she was Protestant, which is, not Catholic. Christian, but not Catholic. And said that you can't see this woman until you're 21. So that would have been, 4 or 5 years later. I'm not sure if he said this while Tolkien was still 16 or whatever. And so then, I guess Tolkien goes through like most of university, and when he turns 21, on his 21st birthday, he sends this woman, Edith was her name, sends her a letter saying, "I never stopped being in love with you." And she gets this letter and she sends him one back and says, "You know what? Actually, it's been a long time and I'm engaged to a different man. But I really like you, so I'm going to call off the engagement." So she, I guess, broke up with that other guy, and then in January of 1913, Tolkien and Edith got engaged. Now, 1913, not long after that, and in July, I think, of 1914, World War I started. And a little while after that, Tolkien, being a young man at the time, was sent to go fight in Europe. And so, yeah, he was, I think, there at the Battle of the Somme, one of the biggest battles of the war. And it was horrible, right? There's, if you know much about World War I, it's like famously one of the most brutal wars. Kind of like modern technology was starting. People were using gas and chemical weapons like, chlorine and stuff like that. People were using artillery shells, and people were fighting in these kind of holes in the ground, trenches they were called, that were wet and full of bugs and rats and stuff like that. And it's just, obviously a terrible time. But eventually Tolkien gets sick. A lot of people got sick in those trenches. And he got sent back home. And soon after he got home, basically everyone in his battalion, which is like, his group of soldiers, I guess, almost all of them died in a battle. So he was kind of lucky to get out. And then he gets back, and in 1916 marries Edith officially, and then starts working and kind of on the path to become a professor. He does some work with the Oxford English Dictionary, working on like the history of words, especially like how English relates to old German words and stuff like that, and starts writing lots of kind of myths, legends about England, saying like, oh, Germany and Italy through Rome and stuff like that, they have all these legends and myths, Greece, of course, but England doesn't really have any. So he started writing them. And eventually he becomes a professor at a few universities before ending up at Oxford and teaching Anglo-Saxon and English literature, especially Beowulf, which is a very famous Old English poem, I guess you could say. It's a long poem. And during this time, he writes The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And not just that, but he creates languages that live in this world, multiple languages for the elves and for the dwarves, and those are the main ones, but maybe a couple of other minor ones too. And this kind of book becomes more than just a couple of books, but he calls it a legendarium, a whole kind of world that has, history and languages and, of course, maps and geography and all that kind of stuff. But it feels very alive, and that's kind of why I'm really interested in Tolkien is first of all, language. I think learning about him when I was a kid, my dad, I think for Christmas or my birthday, gave me a book called like The World of Middle-earth, or some Middle-earth is the kind of world that Tolkien made that The Lord of the Rings is in. It was called something like that. And basically it was all about how Tolkien made the world, what he wrote about, and kind of some stuff about his life that maybe influenced the books. But I learned about what linguistics was from that book, because Tolkien studied linguistics, or they called it philology, which is almost the same thing, I think. It's studying language, basically. And yeah, I think probably the reason that I ended up studying Latin in high school and university, and ended up majoring in linguistics in university, was probably because of Tolkien, because I liked his books so much as a kid, and then when I grew older and learned more about him and his life, I liked what he did, kind of his myth making, his love of language, and yeah, it made me want to pursue a life, I don't know, dedicated to language, I guess you could say. Certainly it's part of the reason why I'm here in Japan teaching English now. And to end it, going back to that Edith story, eventually when Tolkien and his wife died, I think, you know what, I didn't look up who died first, but they died maybe a couple years apart from each other, and they're buried together in a cemetery, with their names, obviously, but also with the names Beren and Luthien, who were two lovers in kind of a romance story that Tolkien made in his, Lord of the Rings universe. And I think that's really, I don't know, romantic, I guess, adorable. And so I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening about Tolkien. Come to a event if you can, and if not, well, I guess you'll hear me here next time. Bye-bye.